So as soon as this pops up, then we'll actually start with memory first. The articles I have for you, the one I gave you so far, is an article by Badley, and it talks a little bit more in depth about the actual working memory model, and the different components of that, and we'll review those today as well, but thought I'd provide you with a little bit more detail about that. And then the other one I'm going to give you, we probably won't go over the information in it, but you may have heard of it, The Seven Sins of Memory, by Schachter. It's a good one about just the different things that our memory does that I don't want to say trick us, but you know, the different things that we do, that bias, you know, just forgetfulness, rationalizing, things like that. So as soon as this decides to work, we'll get kind of started. I guess I could go ahead and do a little bit while we're waiting. Memory's probably a good one. You all just go ahead and dive right in and do the best we can. Has anybody else had to resort to plan Bs besides me?
Yes. We'll say yes.
Alright. So, some basic terminology to remember when you're talking about memory are encoding, storage, and retrieval. A lot of people refer to our memory as working much like a computer, but it really is better. Oh, I just started. Then it would have worked. Have y'all had your caffeine today, or are y'all always this quiet?
They're always this
Those of you that have me know I like people to talk.
She doesn't have me in class.
You just came to see me, didn't you, Tristan? And it's on here somewhere.
I've invited all of my online students to come to any of these lectures, y'all. So Tristan is one of our online students. So she's joining us in this.
She's like the last semester in my human cognitive process class. My husband happened to be on campus that day, and he's like, I'll have a class with you. So he just showed up, sat in the classroom one day, and no one said a word. And it kind of fitted with what we were talking about, which was paying attention to things around you. And when class was over, I asked anybody, I said, did anybody notice anything different today? Is this not going to work the way I want it to?
Do the one at the top.
So, anyway, I asked anybody if they noticed anything different about the class, and some girl just turns around and she goes, I don't know who he is. So it's kind of funny what happens when you see somebody in there. So I just put some funnies on here. Not something I usually do, but since this was a different gig than I'm used to, I thought I'd throw some funnies in there. So that's good. There we go. All right. Encoding, storage, and retrieval. So encoding is the process of us taking in information. So when you're reading something, you're listening to something, any way that you're taking in different pieces of information. Then what happens is you do something with that material, which is you store it. Or, as we'll find out later, you can let it go. Okay? So storage, keeping something. And then retrieval is once we have stored something, we go back and get it. So you can use a lot of different analogies in day-to-day life. You can use the analogy of this is like a computer and the processes that we go through. You could also look at it as in you went shopping and you bought something, you stored it in your closet or your storage unit, and then you decided to wear it and you went back out and got it. So 3 just basic processes that we go through. This right here is the traditional model that we use when we talk about memory. It's from Atkinson and Shiffrin. You see it's a little bit older, before any of our time in this room. I do know that, I think. What happens is you see input, input, input. And we're going to talk about each one of these. I'm going to flip back and forth between this picture. We take in tons of information every second, okay? Everything that you see, that you smell, that you hear, read, everything, okay? That all goes into what we call your sensory register. So let's look at that for a second. Your sensory register holds everything that's coming in a relatively unencoded form, which means we haven't really done anything with it. It's just hitting us and it's coming in, and then that process of what am I going to do with this information begins. So it has a very large capacity, because you have to think about all the billions of pieces that are coming in, okay? A lot of it you don't even realize, but your body and your brain are making a note of it. So very short duration. So you have a very short time in which to decide what you're going to do with this information. You have a few different types of storage here. Your iconic and your visual sensory register. You can see that holds visual information 250 milliseconds longer. Okay, so it has about 12 items you can hold there, and then it fades very quickly. Okay, so for me, someone that studies eyewitness stuff, that you don't see things for a very long period of time. So that's what calls into question, did you actually see what you thought you saw? Because it happens so quickly, you don't store it that long. Then with your auditory sensory register, it holds it for a few minutes longer. So what you're hearing stays for much longer than what you're actually seeing. So let's go back to the picture. So you have all your information coming in, goes into your sensory register. You've got just a few seconds to know what to do with it. And here's what comes into play. What you choose to pay attention to, that's what's going to go into your short-term or your working memory, and you're going to work with it, okay, for longer. If it is not something you need, not something you're going to pay attention to, then that information is lost. It's gone. And which is what happens with the majority of that information, because we can't actually pay attention to all of it. So just a very short piece of it comes in. So let's talk about working memory for a second. What do y'all know about working memory or short-term memory? Okay. Do y'all know how much stuff it can hold? Okay. We have a catchy phrase that it's 7 plus or minus 2. Okay. A maximum usually of 9 pieces of information. We can trick our short-term memory into doing things like with chunking. And what is chunking? Can y'all tell me what chunking means? Or you what? You group things together. So what is something that you have memorized that you have memorized it in chunks? Phone numbers are a great example. Your social security number, your student ID. So your social security number, it is actually 9 digits, which would be the max here, okay? But you actually remember it as 3 chunks of information, okay? So when somebody asks you, what's your last 4 digits? You rattle that off in a phrase. You don't remember it as 4 different numbers. You actually remember it as 1 chunk of information. So it has a short-term duration and a short capacity. So very limited time frame that we can work with things there. What happens after short-term memory is it's either lost, goes away because you don't need it, you've used it for whatever you need to use it for and it's gone, or it goes into long-term memory. Now something to notice here is that all the arrows up until this point are one way, okay? So it goes into your sensory register, you choose to pay attention to it, it goes into your short-term memory. Then if you decide it's something that you need more, you do more in-depth processing. And you probably use some prior information, prior knowledge that you already have stored, and it goes into long-term memory. So let's look at that a second. Oops, wrong way. Long-term memory has an unlimited capacity and an unlimited duration. Now we do know there are some problems with memory, and I'll go ahead, it's not in the PowerPoint, so we'll go ahead and talk about a couple of them. What are some problems that can occur with either putting information in here or even pulling it back out? Okay, you didn't encode it properly. Good one. Is it possible you thought you stored it, but you really didn't? Yes, I think a good example of this is, I'm very guilty of this, that I hide something, maybe that I bought early for Christmas. You put it in that magical hiding place that you're never going to forget. And if you can't remember where that magical storage place is, what does that mean? You didn't get it in there, okay? Or it could mean that you didn't store it in the right spot. One of the beauties of this is that if you store things that are related to each other and connect it to each other, it's a lot easier to get that information out. A lot of times, I'll use testing for y'all. We do things more in the working memory phase where you study it for the time period you need it and then it kind of goes away. We don't work on putting all that information into long term. So like, let's take this class. So everything that you've learned over the past 4 years is culminated right here. So if you did, what, no one does perfect, but if you did really, really good long-term storage, should right now everything you've learned up until this point be coming out because you've stored it here, you've connected it all to each other, and now you're pulling it back out to work with it through this semester? Yes, okay? So there's a lot of benefits to storing that information, because if you don't store things long-term, especially that you need for school or work or something like that, what happens? It's lost, and you're gonna have to do what when it comes testing time? Relearn it. I'll use myself as an example here. If you've had me in class, you know that I'm not, math and numbers are not my thing. And I've had to, the past month, do a lot with statistics for my dissertation. Well, because math is not my thing, I had failed to store exactly how to do some things in SPSS. Well, guess what I had to spend a couple of days doing? Going back and reviewing my process, kind of relearning how to use that because I had not properly stored that information so that I could reuse it later. I think the hope was that I was never gonna have to use it again. So I just thought, oh, I don't need it, so we're gonna pass that off. So questions so far? Yes.
If short-term memory can only hold stuff for about 20 seconds, then how does it work when you're studying for something and you memorize it for the test and you can regurgitate it for the test, but then you forget it at a later point in time because you aren't rehearsing it? But wouldn't it technically be long-term memory because you hold it in your brain for more than 20 seconds?
No, because as long as you're using something to work with it, like you can do it a few different ways. So let's take just remembering like the phone number to call Domino's for pizza. Most of the time what we do is we look up that phone number, we dial it in our phone, we call and order our pizza, we hang up. Then we remember, oh my gosh, I need breadsticks. Pretend there's no redial. You've got to dial that number again. What's going to happen? Did you retain that number? No, you're going to have to look up that number again to call Domino's back. Okay, let's move to another area. You're studying for a test, okay? My guess is when you're cramming last minute for a test, you're working with this nonstop. It's constant and a circular motion that you're just going over it, going over it, going over it, going over it. The problem with that is even though you've done that longer than 20 seconds, couple minutes, whatever, you're still not learning it in a way that's going to put it over here. You've got to do in-depth, meaningful processing to get that into long-term memory. So the rote memorization process of just memorizing definitions and things like that isn't necessarily going to cut it here. So what a good idea for things to do is relate it to things you already know. So this right here is one of the reasons that I tell students when it comes time to take like random electives, you just need some elective hours to finish your degree plan. Don't take those intro classes just because they're lower level. It would be better for you, we'll use psychology majors, to take an upper level. Why? You should already know a lot of that stuff. So maybe it's a new topic within the field of psychology, but if you've already got a basis that you can relate it back to, won't that be easier for you than having to remember something that's brand new, even though it's an entry-level course? Absolutely, okay? So making things meaningful, making good connections with things you already have stored is what's going to keep it in that long-term memory, not just the constant review, rehearsal process, okay?
Probably like a thorough understanding too, like helps like store it long term, like you actually like understand like what you're studying rather than just knowing the terminology for certain things, but just like actually getting a full understanding.
Yes, and that kind of leads us into, I'll just briefly mention the levels of processing model here. Deep processing and in-depth, like I mentioned, is also the same thing as the shallow versus deep processing. So one of an activity I've done in class with this is I have you look for just letters in words, and then I have you also, in another group, write down the first thing that comes to mind. And when you have to process something deeper than just surface level, your memory for that later on is going to be very important. And I'll relate this back to my work. Most of the time with an eyewitness situation, are they looking at the features of a crime scene from a deep processing level or from a shallow processing? It's very shallow because most of it's not anything meaningful to you until it needs to be, and then other things happen that kind of freak you out. So elaboration is a good example of this. I often use the example of, studying for a multiple choice test is much different than studying for an essay test. Okay, this one really just requires you to be just recognize something. So recognition versus recall here, where a deeper processing level, you've got to regurgitate that. You have to have that deep understanding that she mentioned in order to write out that essay question. And as students, most of us prefer what type of test, recall or recognition? We like the recognition test. We like the multiple choice test where we're just supposed to recognize the answer rather than one where we have to dig deeper and regurgitate that information. So I'm gonna kind of already just talk about that a little bit. I think that was the same slide actually. This extends the working memory, and this has to do with the art. This actual image right here is in the article that I've already given you, and this is Baddeley's working memory model. And this one just says that your working memory is controlled by what we call the central executive. He has three other ones here that he referred to as slave systems, that they all do a lot of work, and you see all these different arrows, like Visual Spatial Sketchpad communicates with the central executive. It also communicates with the episodic buffer. So you see that these all work together to guide your memory. This all here he referred to as more of a fluid system, okay? And these three down here are more crystallized, so they're, that stable long-term memory portion that you can pull from while you're in this working memory. So let's go through these different areas. The first one is the phonological loop, and this is where you are repeating things over and over for yourself. It's an acoustic rehearsal. It has a phonological store, which holds the information temporarily, and then it also has a subvocal rehearsal system. So when you're repeating things over to yourself, especially like things that you're hearing, plus maybe you're reading and rehearsing it over to yourself, that could also be in that phonological store. The Visual Spatial Sketchpad, this is where you process and maintain anything that you see visually. And then your episodic buffer, that is where it's between these two systems, and it contains whatever's happening in an episode. So what you're seeing, what you're hearing, it's all coming together right here in this episodic buffer. So right now, are we having an episode? The answer is yes. And you're hearing things, you may be repeating it to yourself while you write some things down, which I did send you this if you wanted to, if you we'll get to that PowerPoint, so you don't have to worry if you didn't get it all. You're hearing things, you're seeing things, you're rehearsing things over to yourself, and it's all working together right now and communicating to that central executive. So what are some problems with your central executive? Well, it's kind of vague and underspecified. My favorite part of this is when I see that it represents a homunculus, and all I can think of is when Sheldon calls his friend a homunculus in Big Bang Theory, and it means a little person. So what this looks like when you start looking at these different pieces and how, you first from the slave system and they communicate with the central executive, it's like you have all these little people in here working together to try to get all this done. So that's where they get the idea of the homunculus. is responsible for your higher level cognitive processing as well. So those are just the three structures of that really quick. Questions? Okay. Let's talk about long-term memory a little bit more really quickly, and then I'll try to move on to here in a second to learning. So you can have a couple different types of memory within long-term memory. One is your declarative memory and one is your procedural. So declarative memory is knowing that. So different pieces of information that you know. You know what the definition of psychology is. You know who the president is. So knowing that. Procedural memory is obviously knowing how to do something, how to ride a bicycle, how to put on your makeup, you know, how to drive your car. Anything that involves a step-by-step process. Declarative memory then breaks down into a couple of different other types, which is your semantic factual knowledge, who's the president, and then your more episodic memory, which is your personal experiences. So an example of an episodic memory might be, you know, a wedding, a birthday party, you know, anything, your 16th, your 18th birthday, something like that, any kind of special episode that you have personally experienced. And then this little chart right here just kind of tells you some characteristics and what happens in each of the different types. So you see here the likelihood of forgetting, because forgetting is a huge problem with us for memory, especially if we don't put it into our long-term memory. Or another problem with memory is that if we do not use something for an extended period of time, it starts to decay and results in us forgetting information or forgetting where we stored it. So episodic memory, likelihood of forgetting is high or semantic is low. And you might be thinking, well, I think I would remember personal experiences a lot better than I would remember, you know, some kind of simple fact. Probably not. And here's an example. I still remember like mnemonic devices that you learn in elementary school, like please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Did y'all learn that one too? Okay. I'm almost 45 years old. I still remember it from elementary school. It has not faded. It is still there. Now, have memories of even my wedding from almost 4 years ago. Have some of those memories faded? Yes. And the difference is you probably don't use the information from some of your episodic memories as frequently as you use some of the factual information that you have. Think about the daily things that you do that involve basic facts, okay? You use that information a lot more. How to add, how to tell time, you know, things like that. Which now I guess is more of a procedural, but don't get the picture. It also talks about presence of emotion. Definitely going to have emotion when it comes to personal events, which does help with their memory, particularly when it's fresh, okay? I don't know, this year could be different. There's a lot of emotion around who's the president, so probably not a good example to use right now. You know, who was the 10th president of the United States? You know, not any emotion associated there with your factual information. A sensory component, again, present, not present here, so you kind of see the differences there. Any questions over any of these? I know I'm going fast, I just want to make sure I get to the bits of all this. Yes?
So, knowing how to do math formulas and history, that's gonna be under semantic memory, because it's factual.
Knowing how to do the math formula would be more procedural. Knowing that it is a math formula would be more factual.
Okay.
So recognizing, okay, this is the Pythagorean theorem. That would be factual. Knowing how to plug in the numbers and do all that, learn how to do, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, that would be a procedural. Implicit versus explicit memory. Explicit memory involves more conscious recollection where implicit does not. I mean, that's really the only difference between them. We do have some different types of recall that involves us to put out some conscious effort. And 3 of those types are free recall, cued recall, and recognition. Recognition, we've already mentioned, it's like a multiple choice test. You've got these 4 options and you have to recognize which one is the correct answer. Cued recall is where I give you a piece of the puzzle and then you recall the other side of it. It would be something like, I'll use an exercise that I've used in my classes before. If I show you a picture of one of the 7 dwarfs, are you likely to know which one it is based off a picture? Maybe if you're familiar with the 7 dwarfs. If I show you Grumpy, are you probably going to recognize that it's Grumpy? Okay, so that would be more of a cued recall. I've given you this photo of a 7 dwarf, and that cues you to which one it is. A free call would just be me saying, okay, write down the names of all the 7 dwarfs. Okay, and you've just got to do that freely. Any order you want, you know, it's not a sequential order of any kind. Free recall. Any way you can remember them, write down all the 7 dwarfs, okay? And how good your memory is determined by how accurate you are with all your answers. You know, how many did you get right on the multiple choice test? Did you pick out, you know, did you say it was the Grumpy when it was really Grumpy? Or did you get all the 7 dwarfs, or did you get all the 7 dwarfs and then, you know, name off one like Cranky? Okay, so that would be that.
We did that in your course too.
We did do that in my course, okay? Had to throw this in there because one of my favorite episodes where he trains Penny to be quiet by giving her chocolates. So any questions over memory before I go on? I know that's a fast review, but what you've got is, you've got a basic memory model that has a sensory register where you take in lots of information. You either choose to process that information further or it's gone. Then you've got your working or your short-term memory, which works for a limited capacity, limited duration. Again, you either process that information further or it is gone. If you choose to process it further, we do more in-depth processing, making things meaningful, elaborating, whatever we need to do, making connections with material that's already there to put it in long-term memory, where we have an unlimited capacity and an unlimited duration. We added a second little part of short-term memory, which was the working memory model by Baddeley, which included the central executive, and underneath that you have the extra systems of the phonological loop, the visual spatial sketchpad, and your episodic memory. And then we had a few other little tidbits of information there. Yes, ma'am?
What about the amnesias? Because on our quiz, we had a lot of like intrograde amnesia questions.
Okay. Amnesia means what? You're forgetting things. So if you, from the time you develop the amnesia, so let's say you have a traumatic head injury, if you can't remember things from the past, things that happened before the accident, then retro means what? If you're wearing a retro outfit, what has happened? Okay, old. Okay, it's going back. Okay, where anterograde is trouble remembering moving forward. You have the memory of everything from the past, but your memory doesn't work well. Like your short-term memory doesn't work good from not counting Groundhog Day. That's a little extreme example, but you have trouble hanging on to that stuff from that point forward. Okay, good questions. All right, let's move into learning a little bit. I do not have an article for you for learning. I really don't have a favorite one for this. Memory is actually more of my thing. I am very comfortable with learning stuff and how it works and the basic terminology. So I think I can give you some good examples to work with. Or looks like we'll probably have some time. I figured you probably needed more help with the learning than you did with the memory anyway. Am I right or wrong on that? Did I just make a bad assumption or what? No? I feel like we need to get up and do some jumping jacks and get the blood flowing and all that kind of stuff. They should come run the half marathon with us Sunday.
Yeah, I'm hoping that my doctor can give me some steroids so that I can actually do it.
We're running a half marathon on Sunday, so y'all be thinking about us. If you don't see us next week, you know it didn't go well. All right, so let me go back. When I say the word learning, what comes to mind? What different methodologies, whose names come to mind? Okay, I heard Tolman. Gestalt. Okay. y'all happen to know who Pavlov is? Okay, or B.F. Skinner, or Watson. Okay, there's also other types of learning besides just the behaviorist view of learning, but that tends to be one of the areas that is focused on the most, I feel like. It's kind of the starting point of learning about learning behaviors. So I chose to focus on classical conditioning and operant conditioning. You also have like social learning theories and things like that. I think we probably all understand the social aspects of learning more because we do see ourselves as social beings, and it seems kind of natural to understand it that way. And while we learn these ways as well, it doesn't always seem like it's a natural process for us. So I've found in the past that people have the most trouble understanding what an unconditioned and a conditioned stimulus is, and the different responses associated with that and how it happens. And particularly I have found when it comes to operant conditioning, people have a lot of trouble distinguishing between punishment and negative reinforcement. Yes, no, maybe? I mean, that has been my history with this kind of information. So I really just want us to talk a lot about examples and things like that. And I brought some with me. I didn't know if we'd have time to actually do worksheets or not, which we may or may not, but I can just put these up on the screen and she can provide those for you later. We can go over some different examples. So let's talk about behaviorism. So these are, when you have something in your environment that is a stimulus, and then you have a reaction to it, okay? And from that interaction, from that experience that you have picked up on a behavior that one or two things is going to happen. You're going to repeat that behavior in the future, or you're not going to repeat that behavior in the future. And what we call that is conditioning. We are conditioning you, the rats, whatever, your dogs, your cats, whatever animal of your choice it is, to do certain behaviors by providing you these experiences that you're learning, whether you're going to repeat them or not. So for learning to occur, there has to be a behavior change. So how do I know that you've learned something? Because your behavior changes. Okay, so let's use our pets. Everybody have pets in here? Or have had a pet? How do you know that your dog has learned to sit?
You tell it to do it, it doesn't.
It doesn't. Prior to you saying sit, well, when this started, you said sit, and what happened? Nothing. They look at you, wondering why you're not giving them the treat, and then you've got to push their hind end down, and they're fighting you for it. You know, they don't want to go down. But eventually, they learn what? Oh, when she says sit, if I do this, then I get my treat. And before you know it, you say sit, what happens? They go. So that's how you know they have learned what the command means, that they've learned this process. How do I know you've learned something? How do we as teachers know that y'all have learned the material we want you to learn?
Performing well.
Performing well on exams, okay? What else? Performing well on your papers, doing good writing, using wonderful APA style. What else? Does it always have to be a paper and pencil kind of version to your learning? What else could it be? How else could you demonstrate to me that you have learned something? Okay, presenting it.
Using resources.
Okay.
Conversation.
Conversations. Okay. I'll say a lot of times for us as teachers, we don't get the benefit of getting to see y'all having learned the material because you use it when you get past us. Okay, so sometimes we don't get to